In the last video, we tackled the rear brakes on this 2014 Audi A6. In this video, we're moving to the front. We'll be replacing the pads and rotors with these ECS Tuning drilled and slotted rotors and Akebono ceramic pads. These parts will be linked in the description below. As with the rears, I'll be demonstrating this process on the passenger side, so let's get into it. As always, we'll want to open up the brake fluid reservoir to relieve the pressure in the system. This will allow the fluid to run back up the lines into the reservoir when we compress the brake caliper piston. We'll want to lay some paper towel up around here to soak up any brake fluid in case the reservoir overflows. Now, before we start removing anything, I like to hit both the caliper carrier bolts and the rotor retaining screw with some penetrating spray. Doing this now will allow for more time for penetration, which will greatly help in removing those bolts. So pretty much all we're going to have to do is pull out the two slide bolts. That will again release the caliper. The caliper and the pads will slide right off after removing this clip and prying something in there just to compress the piston a little bit. Pull this off, make sure it does not hang on the brake line. So you can either flip it up here and rest it up here, or I'm going to put some mechanics wire and just hang it just in case it does fall off. It's not going to rip off the brake line. Once we do that, I believe that you can take these two pins out and the rotor can come out without the carrier, but it's just as easy to remove the two 21mm bolts in the back that hold on the caliper carrier. So I'll remove this. Once we get all that done, we'll press the piston, put the new pads in, put the carrier back on, put the caliper back on, torque everything to spec, and we should be good to go. This side does not have the pad wear sensor that's on the other side. I'll show you that over there. For the caliper carrier, we're probably going to need a little bit of mechanical advantage, so that's where this big pipe comes in. So let's remove those caliper slide bolts. They should be 13mm hex head bolts, and these should go through the slide bolt assembly to hold the caliper onto the carrier. And if this car had more miles on it, I would remove the slides. However, at this point, it didn't appear that they needed servicing or replacement. Now with the slide bolts removed, we can remove the anti-rattle retaining clip, which is seated on the top and bottom of the caliper carrier and is held in a small hole in the caliper itself. The retaining clip or retaining spring is under tension, so I was very careful while removing this. Also got my safety glasses on to avoid a spring in the eye. Similar to the rears, we'll want to pry between the carrier and the caliper to compress the piston slightly. This will provide the clearance needed to pull the pads and the caliper off the rotor. And at this point, I like to loop some mechanics wire through the caliper, and I'll set this caliper up on top of the dust shield. It's very important that the caliper does not hang or put any tension on the brake lines. We can also remove the outer pad, but we'll want to leave the inside pad clipped into the caliper piston. This will give us a surface to apply pressure when we're compressing the piston. More on that in a second. With the caliper out of the way, we can remove the 21mm carrier bolts. And as I mentioned, these are generally very hard to remove, so penetrating spray and the breaker bar are both very helpful in this step. Now we can remove the T30 torque screw and remove the rotor. Oftentimes, and in this case, the rotor is seized onto the hub, and a few taps with a rubber mallet will generally loosen that right up. And I like to partially thread a lug bolt back into the rotor so it doesn't fall when it finally does come loose. Same as the rears, we'll want to make sure that we have a clean mating surface between the new rotor and the hub. So I'm using a pneumatic drill with a wire brush attachment, but any old wire brush will work. Now we'll want to go ahead and install the new rotor. All the parts in this video were purchased from ECStuning.com. ECS offers a wide range of VW Audi parts, including fully assembled brake kits, which include all of the parts that you need to perform the brake service. I've linked the service kit in the description below, and if you head over to ECS Tuning using those links, I do get a small kickback, which really helps this channel. With the rotor installed, we can go back to the caliper and get it ready for installation. Similar to the rears, this vehicle is equipped with a pad wear sensor. However, it's located on the driver's side. So after we finish up this side, let's head over there and take a look at that. We can now compress the caliper piston, applying pressure directly onto the pad rather than onto the caliper piston itself. With the piston compressed, we can remove that inner pad and go ahead and install the new pads. The pads should be greased on the backside and anywhere that they contact the caliper carrier. And again, the sensor wire will need to be installed in the pad on the driver's side, plugged back in. We'll take a look at that in a second. With the pad clipped into the caliper, we can reinstall the caliper carrier. It is recommended that these bolts are replaced every time they're removed. So with new bolts, we can torque them to spec. Torque specs will be provided in the description below. With the carrier and the rotor installed, we can lower the caliper and pads over the rotor into the carrier. With the caliper slides aligned with the carrier bolt holes, we can reinstall the slide bolts. Again, it's recommended that you replace these. And we'll torque these to spec as well. Now, the last thing to do is to reinstall the anti-rattle retaining spring. And we're done. And as promised, let's go over to the driver's side and take a look at the sensor. The sensor will need to be unplugged before removing the caliper. Then the caliper can be removed just like the passenger side, and the pad can be removed after compressing the piston. Before you remove that sensor, take a look at it and note the location and the path of the sensor wire so you can reinstall it correctly. Now installing the new pad, we'll push the sensor wire into the pad and feed the wire through the hole in the caliper. And with the caliper installed, we'll want to make sure the sensor wire is secured under the little tab on the caliper, and then we can plug it back in. And that's it. Huge thanks to ECS Tuning for helping out with the parts for both this video and the previous video. If you're interested in my process for the rear brakes, please check out my 2 most recent videos. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. And if you'd like more content like this, consider subscribing to this channel. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.